Welcome back, Summoners. I have another best of deck tech and tournament breakdown for you today. I'm joined by.
This is Bradykin.
Thanks for coming on, Brady Ken. I'm excited to have you walk through the deck and your tournament run and so on and so forth. So just walk me through what you just did at the regional qualifier Hartford.
Sure. So this is my second regional that I've been to. The first was RQ Vancouver. I did not do very well there. I did also play Ezreal there, but I played a different version and I made some poor choices in how that was built. But yeah, we went to Hartford. I did well in the pre RQ with a 5-0 there. And then to my surprise, things just kept going well in the main event. I did not go in with these aspirations, but just one round led to another
Yep.
and I ended up getting top 4 at the event.
Congratulations, top four and the best of Ezreal, which I will show on
Mhm.
screen now. So we are going to start off by going through the deck list here. So before we get to the deck list, unfortunately, we had a bit of a malfeasance with Brady's webcam. So he's not on webcam, but you can hear his beautiful voice, and he's going to walk you through the deck list here. So on screen, we have his best of Ezreal deck list, and just kind of walk me through it top to bottom, some choices you made, things you might change if any.
Sure. Okay, so to start off, there are some cards here that are structural that you're going to see in every Ezreal list and in most blue-purple decks. That would be things like the 3 of Stack Deck, the 3 of Stupefy, at least a couple Wages, at least a couple Bewitching Spirits, the Fizzes, and the Starcross. Those are all in the deck for fairly apparent reasons.
Sure.
Um, Things like the one of Turn to Dust, most decks in this meta right now are running some form of gear removal in the main board. I opted for this over the other option of acceptable losses, mainly because of Sivir. If acceptable losses is your only main board gear removal, then against Sivir you have no board removal effectively.
Right.
Uh, it doesn't hurt that Turn to Dust accounts as a targeting effect for Ezreal, which means there could be a lot of turns where you Turn to Dust and then you just Stupefy to draw 2 cards effectively. Um, Beyond that, this is a Pack of Wonders deck, which most Ezreal lists are these days, but there's a few versions of that. All of them will run at least 2 Pack of Wonders. Some of them, including mine, will commit more to the bit and run 3. After that, you get versions of do they run Treasure Trove, do they run the list, or do they run both? And I'm running both, and in lists that run both, you tend to see this same 2 and 2 ratio. The reason you do that is because you don't want to be flooded with cards that interact with the pack and not have enough packs to use them, but you want the variety of options to be able to find different lines on different turns. Beyond that, we have a couple Vex Apathetic. Vex Apathetic is a very good card. It doesn't fit in every Ezreal deck, but it does fit in this one because of other things that we're running here, which is the 3 of Bellows and the 3 of Deadly Flourish. This deck list is very indexed to base targeted removal because it wants to get to a point where it has a Vex on a board, so nothing can accelerate at you, and then every turn is some version of they develop a bunch of units and then you kill them all, and then they develop a bunch and then you kill them all. It creates a scenario, and we'll get into this later, but this deck is fundamentally trying to simplify the gameplay. It's trying to make it so there's limited options for how your opponent can do things because the less options they have, the less surprises can come at you. And one of the ways you simplify it is just by spawn camping them. And this deck list is designed to do that. And I love that that is the term people have started using for it. I did not make it up. But it fits very well, and I love the way that league terms are sneaking into card game cadence. Um, to cover the last remaining cards, 2 of Thousand Tail Watcher. This is probably a pretty not needing to be explained card. It's good at helping to answer Ruin Runners. It's really good in combination with Bellows Breath. It's not the only way to combo with Bellows Breath because the list is another fantastic way of doing it.
Right.
But when you're running 3 Bellows Breaths and when they're often the target for your Fizz, you want some redundancy. 2 of Gust tends to be a pretty good number in this metagame, especially recently. There's been a lot more aggro decks lately, particularly the yellow aggro decks. This deck list was very designed to fight them, and then I, of course, didn't see a single one of them in Hartford, but that's fine. But the 2 of Gust tends to be a pretty good number against them. What else haven't I mentioned? One of Eclipse, there just tends to be a moment where Eclipse is helpful. Sometimes it's just to undo a punch first. Sometimes it's part of a Bellows Breath on the base. It's not an amazing card in this deck, honestly, and it is one of the flex cards you could switch, but it is usually good enough to justify a one of slot. It helps that it's a very efficient card with Fizz. And then the card that I intentionally left to the last of the part of the discussion, because I think it's the most unique card to my deck list, is the Sprite Fountain. So Sprite Fountain does a lot of cool things in this deck. Well, the most obvious thing is that it's just a very efficient way to contest battlefields. And while we don't care about getting the points, we do care about fighting the other units off the battlefield using it as pseudo removal and putting a sprite in the way that they need to get past to score again. The fact that it's something you can use with Pack of Wonders can be really valuable because it means that it's not a one and done kind of thing. You can play the Sprite Fountain to get a sprite and then pack it to hand and it's still available next turn. You could even pack it to hand and play it again if you need 2 sprites on that turn. The funniest moments I've had is I have killed a Baron with 4 sprites from the same Sprite Fountain before. Um, it felt good. It felt very good. What other things can this do? If you face a control matchup, first off, strap in. But it is a great way to keep having a way to score the battlefield because control matchups in this game tend to end up in a scenario where both players have lots of cards and can kill any unit the other person plays. And you could end up in these kind of stalemates that are impossible to score in. But Sprite Fountain is a really good way of breaking that logjam. So for all of these things, it's not just a good card in a lot of matchups, but it fills a lot of different roles. Unfortunately, none of those roles are useful against Aurelia and Yi, which is why I couldn't justify more than one of them in the
Sure.
main board. But it's so good into a lot of things that I wanted one in the main and I wanted to be able to side into 2.
Sure.
So going into the sideboard now, we have the second Sprite Fountain. We have a couple more pieces of gear removal. That's all fairly self-explanatory. Kha'Zix has been a pretty traditional response for purple decks to be able to put efficient might into fighting Aurelia and Yi. This deck doesn't use it the best in the world, but we're working with limited options for filling that role, and it does a good enough
Sure.
job. They're also surprisingly good into Lilia, which is occasionally a problem matchup.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, it's not a horrible one, but we can go into that later on. So the Mind Splitter is another card that I like in the Aurelia Yi matchups. You often end up in a scenario where you've spent a couple turns reducing their resources, but they've developed like a camel or their Aurelia, and you're going to need to fight them off the board soon. Mind Splitter is a really good card to play the turn before you can contest them. You pull the most dangerous card out of their hand, and you confirm what is in their hand, so you know, am I playing around Defy? Am I playing around Punch First, etc. That moment of hand knowledge is really valuable, and it's just large. And then the last one, and probably my favorite card from the most recent set, is the Angler Beast.
Beast
I will admit a
mode.
I will admit a bias for this card. I really like it, but I think 2 of was a correct choice for the meta that we're looking at. It combos really powerfully with the list. The list is an amazing way to set up their entire board to get Angler Beasted to hand. There's less LeBlancs than there used to be, but it's a crazy good card into LeBlanc because you're not only emptying their board, you're doing it without triggering their death knells.
Knows.
And if their clone is of something like a Watchful Sentry or a Soaring Scout, they're not even getting a card back in hand for it. And then these double ones was another adaptation to the Field of Yellow Aggro that I didn't face because they're quite good into all of those decks, whether that's Victor, whether it's Rek'Sai, whether it's Darius. So it's a very good card for these roles. A lot of Ezreal lists have run a 1 over it. I opted to go up to 2, mainly because of Ash. A lot of the decks that it's good against are running Ash. Them ashing it out of your hand can kind of disrupt your whole game plan. Coupled with the fact that a 1 of card, even in a deck that draws as much of this, can be hard to find.
Right.
It was a slot that in my mind justified 2 of. I think I stand behind that, even though they almost never got boarded in while we were in Hartford.
Sure. I was going to say, I want to put you on the spot here. What? And this could be beyond Hartford, so we'll go a little past the purview of Hartford. But what is the most amount of units that you have Angler Beasted back to the hand?
Oh god, let me think for a second. In Hartford, there wasn't any great Angler Beast play. Like I think I did a 3 or a 4 at one point.
Still pretty
Um,
good.
but I have done some crazy ones. The largest number I'm remembering, I want to say 8 is the one that I'm remembering because you'll understand the context a little bit more. It was a more old school Victor deck that still ran the Vanguard armories, and he
Ah,
developed 2
okay,
against me.
okay.
And what happened was on one turn, he made 7 tokens from his ability and then the 2 things, and I played the Angler Beast. And then the next turn, he made all the tokens again, and he played, I think it was like a Xin Zhao or something, and then I Pack of Wandered it to hand and Angler Beasted him again. Um, that so even though it wasn't on one turn, that Angler Beast farmed a lot more than 7 or 8, but I think
Pretty
on one
good.
turn, 8 was probably the cap. I don't there might have been other moments. I don't remember every one I've done, but that's the one that comes to mind.
That's so funny. Okay, so walk me through your tournament run. Going from round one, some were matchups easy. Like here, round two, you played Lux. How is that matchup? That I have no opinion on that, but that seems like it could either be really easy for you or just an absolute nightmare.
So Combo Lux is this deck's worst matchup. I would go
Yep.
far as to say it's actually unwinnable. Fortunately for me, that was not Combo Lux. That was a
Oh,
Control Lux deck.
we take those.
We do. My opponent in that round was very nice. He's responded to a message I met on Twitter. He said very nice things. He's a very good player. It was fortunate to me that he decided to play the cooler version of Lux because I have a natural chance of winning into it. So those games were insane, and they should have been the round two stream content. It would have been better than it. I don't know what was the round two stream content, but this would have been funnier. Um, because it was one of those control matchups where we both have a million cards in hand. I can spirit him, but it doesn't matter. And we kill everything each other play. In game one, both of us burned out.
Ah,
I burned myself out intentionally because every single unit of the deck was in the trash. So I did everything I could to draw as quickly as possible, which involved like spamming like all three stack decks in the same turn. Um, and then I ended up in a scenario where I needed to cast two Stupefies to burn out, but there was no units in play, and no one had any reason to put units in play. Um, and then he ended up in a scenario where he tried to set up a time warp win, but he didn't have any accelerated units left. So he then tried to hold with like 5 different 2 and 3 drops. And he only had one card left in his deck and was at 7 points. So if I killed his board, he could never win again because he would
sure.
burn out and I would get the winning point. And I did barely manage to clear his board that game. So that game was a 40-minute crazy experience. It was a very fun way to start the tournament, especially because like when I got the matchup and I saw it was against Lux, I groaned audibly to the
Humor, yeah.
Montrealers around me. I think I said something along the lines of "I'll see you all in the X1 bracket." But that was a very fun game against a very fun opponent. Game two was a little more one-sided. It was kind of the Sprite Fountain win con thing I was mentioning.
Right.
He doesn't have a great way to stop me from Sprite Fountain packing over and over and over again. Um, and that game we were both playing a little more for points because we knew we were not going to get a game three. So that game, one way or another, was going to end in overtime on points or something very close to that. So that was round two. Um, Round three against LeBlanc. LeBlanc is a good matchup, but a very skill intensive one. I
Sure.
don't think I played that round particularly well. Um, but we did manage to get there. It comes down to like a lot of like complicated combos to board wipe them, to like keep them off of getting value baited hooks. You want to try and like line up good angler beasts. You want to try and line up good gust usages. It's a very complicated matchup, but it's one that the LeBlanc has weirdly little agency in. It really just comes down to your draws and your removal
Sure.
lines.
Hand check.
Um, yeah, it can be a bit of a hand check. It can be a bit of a like, do you see the patterns on how to use the list and bellows to kill everything? A lot of it can come down to did they Karthus, and if so, do you have Deadly Flourish? Um, One of the things that it's very good against is killing the Karthus, so they can't get like the crazy values out of it.
Right.
So that was that one. The Kha'Zix matchup. Kha'Zix is a very good matchup for this deck. So that was round four. Kha'Zix fundamentally, it's an aggro deck where its thing is the ability to pull everything back to base and protect it there. But this
Right.
is a deck that runs a ton of base targeted removal, so
Right.
its thing is almost useless. And then its other thing is their extremely good signature spell, which I did walk into a few times in that matchup, and I made things harder than it needed to be. But we're not the best deck to use that against because our units don't matter and we often don't have any. So, like, it's still good against us, certainly, but it's better against other people.
Right.
So, that combination of things just means that Kha'Zix matchups end up being like a very easy version of Rengar matchups, which are also already pretty good for us. So, there isn't a ton that a Kha'Zix can do if you play the matchup well. Round
Okay.
five was against Sivir.
Ooh.
Aurora is this deck's best matchup.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that was
Okay.
I was happy to see. This is something interesting. I've been getting lots of messages over the past few days about like, are you going to make any kind of content? How do you play this matchup? And I think the matchup that people most, I don't know if it's misunderstand or just aren't sure the right way to pilot through is the Aurora matchup.
Okay.
Because I'll frame it like this: Aurora has to be the beatdown in this matchup. They're not good at that. Um,
Fair.
they they do not have the inevitability, and their entire deck is built on the premise that they do. The thing
Hmm.
is, even if they get out the turn 3 Aurora, even if they kill a unit with it, even if they get a couple dragons on the field, they're not winning the game very quickly. And as soon as you Starcross the dragons to their hand, as soon as you turn dust to the Aurora, or particularly as soon as you get rid of the last rights so they can't keep reanimating things out of the
Mhm.
trash, the game just kind of falls apart for them. And this, especially if you've been disrupting their hand so they don't have like, are they going to start discarding their extra like deck digging tools? Are they going to start discarding their ramp? When you pull a couple pieces out of the shell, tends to all fall apart. Sometimes you lose game one because turn to dust is on the bottom of the deck. But it's still not common. And then in game two, you bring in another turn to dust, you bring in another sprite fountain, which is a way of scoring that they can't stop. You bring in the mind splitter, which can allow you to pull out whatever card actually matters in their hand, because sometimes like one card matters and three don't. But really, you can just kind of play it slow and just spend the first like 5 turns bewitching spirit packing them. You don't even ever need to leave it on the board. You don't have to score. And then their deck just kind of falls apart. It's a very obnoxious way to play, but it's very reliable.
Hey, if it works, it works.
Yep, exactly. So match round 6 was an Ezreal mirror. We were
Okay.
actually the backup feature table for the stream, but they never used our footage. But that does mean that a
No.
lot of the production people saw this match, and many of them have complained to me about it. They have all described it in various ways as watching paint dry. Um, because it is the Lux match, but supercharged. I joked about this at one point when I was facing my Pike opponent at the top 8, and the stream did hear it. But that matchup is basically the answer to what if there is no beatdown. No one is ever incentivized to go on the offensive. It is just an endless war of resources. So it is in many ways similar to the Lux matchup. Not a lot of people have experience with this kind of matchup. I, for some reason, decided to teach it to myself for this. It was not the intention of my deck list, but my deck list is accidentally very well built for the mirror.
Interesting.
Um,
So, what's
the
the win con in the mirror?
Basically, these decks tend to be like overlapping groups of value engines, whether that's pack troving, whether that's doing things with Bewitching Spirit, whether that's doing things with like Fizz stack decks. So both of you will be doing some form of value engine, and the winner tends to be whoever starts to accelerate ahead of the other. And start just getting ahead in the resource trades, because eventually that turns from you going up in cards to you spiriting them 3 times a turn,
Sure.
and then one person's hand will eventually collapse, and then that's the point where the win con will happen somehow. It doesn't
Mhm.
really matter how at that point. So that's the way these matchups usually end, but Sprite Fountain can disrupt that. Because if you're in a scenario where both people are playing kind of a slower game, especially game 2, when you don't tend to get to have 3 packs on the field because everyone's boarded in their gear removal,
Right.
so you don't have it as an easy way to turn your cards in hand into repeatable value. What you can then instead do with them is turn it into repeatable attempts of conquering. And
Right.
they will need to trade their cards for your reusable sprites and trade their runes for it. It creates a new problem for them that most other lists don't have to present to you. And the other thing is, not all pack lists are like full pack trove and list to get like the full set of value. The one I was facing there was doing a just pack list, which is not nearly as effective in the mirror.
Mm.
It's very effective against a lot of other decks, but in the mirror, it is not where you'd want to be.
Right.
So either you win through pack spirit nonsense, pack sprite founded nonsense, or it comes down to whose value engines survived the longest and overwhelmed the other person's hand. But that other second option takes a long time, which is why you never get 3 games in this matchup. Yeah, so that was match 6. Round 7 and 8 were both against Master Yees. This is getting to the late part of the day. I don't remember these games too carefully, if I'm being honest. But
Sure.
this matchup tends to come down to trying to really aggressively attack their hand. You do this both with like spirits, but also by trying to force them to play cards. So this will come down to like using like stupefy flourish combos to try and kill your Yi champion, going really aggressively with removal of their 2 drops, things like that. If you
Game
can
one.
slow their
Go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. No, no, go for it.
I, I was just gonna say, like, what your goal essentially is to slow their point scoring by killing their early units to give you the time to reduce their hand. They'll usually develop a Ruin Runner at some point around this. But if you can reduce their hand so they don't have tricks for it, then the Ruin Runner is a lot less scary, and you can just throw a Watcher at it. Both of these matchups came down to some version of that. I don't remember the
Right.
particulars of them.
That sounds like a control playing against you in general. Game one in
Yeah.
this matchup seems really important because they're on like this wildly unoptimized list into you because they're still on like a whole bunch of auctions, which like if they want to spend a unit that's only 4 might and 2 runes to steal my list, that I'm probably gonna have multiple of anyway, that seems pretty good for you. And half of their buffs don't replace themselves. Primal strength, punch first, on guard, they don't float, they don't replace themselves. So, it seems like game one is really important in this matchup.
I agree. Yeah, if you lose game one, you tend to be in pretty bad shape. Um, it's also a lot easier to win this matchup on the play.
Right.
So, like I would say more than most matchups. So I would agree that matchup's particularly hard. They I think benefit more from sideboarding than we do. We do benefit from sideboarding. The Kazakhs are helpful. The Mind Splitter is helpful. They get to optimize their list, bring in more sabotages,
Right.
bring in the third Ruin Runner in most lists. I believe is in the sideboard, which increases their chance of hitting one or maybe two camels. So yeah, so that was day one. Going into day two, round nine was versus a Rengar, which was also on stream. It ended up going to time, but this tends to be a pretty typical aggro matchup, where you're just trying to kill all their units, start taxing their hand. You don't focus too much on scoring yourself, although as we saw with time rushes, you do need to keep it going a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, you're just trying to focus on killing everything they place and then end up spawn camping them with a Vex, just like most matchups.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I remember watching this and you got through two of the Kaisas and then he draws a third and I'm like, oh my goodness. Cause especially on the Deus game, because they could just accelerate Kaisa every turn, bounce it back with Deus. I
mhm.
was watching and I'm like, no, not the third Kaisa. That was crazy. But this was a really good one
Yeah,
to watch.
yeah, when I learned that was a top deck, I was a little upset. Because I prepared for as many scenarios as I could, but I didn't have a line that played around the double accelerate that turn.
Right.
And as you correctly identified, the Deus game against any deck that runs Deus tends to be really dangerous. I actually want
Right.
to highlight one thing there. With all the talk about the rules weirdness with Deus, people started wondering if it was a battlefield that Ezreal should run. I'm just going to give a very emphatic no. We should not. And if you watch that matchup, you will see why. For all the interesting things we could do with it, it creates way more problems for us than it fixes.
They do it
And
better.
yeah, they do it better. And one of our most concerning matchups, which is Yi, uses it way better. And then if you give it to Aurelia, then they're just going to bounce their Scuttle Crab on it and have another way of counteracting your hand disruption. It's a cool battlefield. We should know how to use it when our opponent presents it to us. We should never run it in our deck, not in this meta. So I just thought I'd cover that while we were on it. So if we go to match 10, it was a Vex. Vex matchups are weird because there's like 18 different versions of the deck, and you
Right.
just kind of need to figure it out as you go. Some of them are people have been using the term hold slop for like Sona style decks, which I find quite funny. I love Sona. I That's my preferred version of Vex, but like you play against that differently than you play against the pseudo Aurelia versions, and you play differently against that than you play against like a hidden version. In this case, it was much more of a hidden version of Vex. Um, and against that kind of matchup, you're not really trying to tax their hand. If you can stop them from holding, then you can tax their hand. But it's pretty
Right.
hard to stop them from holding for a little while. The thing is, their whole deck is predicated on the idea that by establishing a hold, they can overwhelm the other person with resources, but you can match them resource for resource. So, what you do in that matchup is you really aggressively remove everything other than the Vex 4 and other than any deflect units they deploy. If you have an efficient way of killing a deflect unit, then that's great, you do it. But what you're really trying to do is just keep their board state down and not let them be double scoring. You can let them hold for a few turns and they'll sort of keep up in cards with you. But that deck is so aggressive on burning its own runes that you'll end up in a scenario where maybe both players have 6 cards in hand, but they have 5 runes and you have 12,
12,
and then
right.
things just fall apart for them. So that's essentially the story of the matchup, at least into Hidden Vex. Various parts of that are applicable to all versions of Vex, but Hidden Vex is the one that destroys its own runes most aggressively. So that is the resource you can target. the more you make them need to hide cards to prevent you from clearing their battlefields, the more you can make them need to defy things, the better.
Hmm.
And you just need to make sure that you don't chase them down the ruined rabbit hole by repeating Bellows on a Vex 4.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got to do it, you got to do it, but you don't want to. And it's not plan A. It is not immediately important to kill the Vex champion. The next two matchups were for rounds 11 and 12 were against Diana. One of these two was someone who was in the finals.
East Whites, yep.
They were, yeah, they were both very good players, but as people will probably be aware, that matchup is horrendous for Diana.
That sounds
And the
very free for Ezreal. That sounds free.
yeah, I think it's good to break down a little bit why though, because that's like an established ethos, but people might not understand the reason. Blue and purple cards, for reasons that, as far as I can tell, is entirely coincidence, do everything in like increments of 3. Most of the good units in these cards have 3 might. A lot of the good removal does 3 damage. A lot of the cards cost 3. I don't know why, but 3 is just a common theme in these cards. But a side effect of what that means is that the answers in these cards are really good at answering the questions. Um, so inherently, if you're in a blue-purple mirror, the removal side will almost always have an advantage against the proactive side as a result, just because the answers line up really, really well. Coupled with the fact that Diana is a deck very built around Hui, and thus very vulnerable to it being star-crossed over and over,
Right.
and that when they start needing to replay their ways over and over, and especially if they keep like replaying them and then trying to ride the wind them and having that disrupted, their runes get really taxed. So you end up in a scenario similar to the Vex situation, where you've been just like trading spells back and forth. Maybe they've gotten 3 or 4 points, but they find themselves at like 7 runes and you're at 12 again. And then you're at the point where you can do more than just answer their board. You can also do something else proactive, and then things fall apart for them. This matchup, like Vex, doesn't tend to be about hand disruption. Sometimes it happens, but they tend to be pretty good at keeping their hand full. It's really about board control. And both of those matchups went pretty much the way that Diana matchups usually do, which is they play their first couple of units, they get Deadly Flourished or Bellows, they play away, it gets star-crossed, they get sad, the match ends. Um,
Yeah, plus
it's
they're on like 13 or 14 total units, and sometimes even lower, and you could just chew through their units and they're like, okay, what next?
Exactly. And also, a little bit like Kha'Zix, a big part of how they plan to defend their units is by flashing them to base. But
We
they are
don't
not
care
safe
about.
from the Deadly Flourish or the
Yeah.
Bellows at base. This list being only on 2 wages is something that people might find a little weird, but base targeted removal is so good at the moment, and running 3 rages and 3 flourishes is a little clunky. So that's
Sure.
why it ended up with a ratio of 2 and 3 instead of maybe 3 and 2. And in matchups like this, it tends to be really useful. It also does things like you can't wage the Diana before it gets to use its ability at least once, the champion,
Right.
but you can just flourish it the turn they play it. And just because they know the flourishes exist in your deck, better Diana players will usually try and avoid playing it like turn 1 on the draw. Which means whether you have it in hand or not, they might do a suboptimal play like a Raven Bloom that turn.
Just the
So yeah,
threat of
so
it.
both of those matchups went roughly the same way there. And then round 13 was an ID
Okay.
against the eventual winner of the event.
So we're
And then
going
just
into
to go
Top
into the
Cut now.
yeah, so in the top 8, where both of these matchups were on stream, so people will be able to see them in a lot more detail. The Pike matchup was great. I watched it back afterwards a couple times, and I get why people enjoyed watching this matchup so much. It
It's a
was a
good one.
very entertaining matchup with a lot of like interesting interactions. Pike, like Vex, there's a lot of different versions. You need to figure it out on the fly. Or in the top 8, you get shown their deck list after turn 3. In this case, if people
What?
were did you it might not have been as clear on the stream. They forgot to give us the deck lists. So they paused the game 3 turns in. It was also like when they gave us the signal to go, we both played our first few turns at lightning speed.
Hmm.
So it was his turn 3 after I had gone first. So the overall 6th turn of the game where they told us to stop and we just
Wait.
waited for a few minutes and they just hand us deck lists. But yeah, so from that moment, I could learn that it was much more of a mid-range style pike. I'm going to say like a
Mhm.
Draven-esque kind of pike.
Sure.
Um, that is the version that I would most like to see as this deck because it doesn't have the ability to match you in the value engine, and it's not as heavily indexed on like accelerate units as some versions are. It has them and they're dangerous, but like I know there are versions of Pike that use things like Sharkling. I don't know how common that is, but like when they lean that heavily into it, it can be a bit of a problem for us.
Sure.
But yeah, he was playing a very mid-range esque version. I just mostly had to be worried about whether he could get like double Kaisa conquers. He had is it Void Bolt? What is the 4 damage red removal?
Void Seeker.
Uh, Void Seeker, yes. He had those as a clean way of killing Vexes, which is a good idea for him, and it came very in handy in our matches. But you don't play a particularly different strategy in this matchup than you usually would. Control the board, then control the hand, then eventually score. And when you're in a top cut, thankfully you don't have to worry about timer problems anymore, which means you can play it like as
Right.
slowly and methodically as the strategy dictates. You don't need to worry about needing to try and close the game faster. So game one kind of snowballed away from him because I just had the Pack Trove combo very early. I had double flourishes on his first 2 units. There wasn't, it was an impossible game for him. There was nothing he could have done. Game two had a very good back and forth that he was able to close with a double Kaisa cleave. It caught me by surprise that he kept the cleaves in the deck, but we saw why there. It gave him the avenue to win the game by having it conquer over a double sprite. And then game three was interesting. It started off very well. I had double pack and trove. I was accelerating on him. And then I got thermo beamed. And what I saw later is that I got like 15 or 20 different messages at that time that said, no, not the thermo beam. Um, and then we ended up in a weird state where my value engine was dead. And the chance of me drawing it back again was not huge, which meant in the long game was no longer secure, which is a very uncertain place to be in this deck, especially when it was a double aspirants game. And
Right.
then he drew double mind splitters and started using them to try and pick my hand apart. So I ended up making up a brand new strategy for this deck on the fly of how to be the beatdown. And that essentially involved star crossing the mind splitter to hand over and over and over and accepting that he was going to keep using it to pick apart my hand. So I started focusing very heavily on getting the Ezreal draw every single turn to keep up with the losses.
Right.
And then I needed to start essentially point rushing him in as far as a double aspirants game control that can point rush. But it was a very different way of playing the deck. It was very interesting. He over time started to first get through the fizzes in my hand and then get through all the various options for the star crosses. But I was able to control him long enough that I didn't fall so far behind in points that I would be vulnerable to the double accelerate again. And I eventually found the third pack in a bewitching spirit and was able to just pick apart the remainder of his hand from
Right.
there. It was a very interesting game. It was a
It
very
was. It was a good
enjoyable
watch.
opponent to face.
Very
I'm
good
glad
watch.
people enjoyed it. And then in the top four, we faced Master Yi, and we saw what happens when the matchup goes wrong. So I want to give a shout out to my opponent because he understood how to fight Ezreal better than any Yi I've ever faced. He understood that the battle was just as much about his hand size as it was about the board or about the points.
Mm.
And he did something that a lot of Ys don't, that I probably shouldn't be saying so explicitly, but I will anyways, which is he would sometimes keep cards in hand that he didn't need to cast right now as essentially ways of blocking discards. Like, do you really need that another 2 drop on the field right now? Do you really need to cast
Right.
that sabotage? Do you really need to charm in and kill the bewitching spirit? He made choices around that were a lot more conservative than most players I did, because in part because he had the double rune runner draw and he knew he was playing around them, but it was also clear that it was a different level of understanding of the matchup than most people have,
Shout
and
out
it worked
Factor.
very well. Sorry, say it again.
I said shout out Factor. He played that
Yeah, for
matchup
sure.
well.
Yeah, he played it great. When I watched it back, like I felt like he played it basically almost perfectly. It was unfortunately also a case of my draws both games were really awkward. I ended up having hands that just like they would be full of like Fizz Eclipse Starcross the list or something like that, and
Right.
it doesn't really do anything. Sometimes that can happen in a deck built as based around combinatorics of cards as this. Sometimes you don't draw the right enabler for the situation, especially if you don't draw any stack decks to help like unbrick things.
Just get it started. Yeah. Do you think
Yeah,
either of these games, watching them back, were winnable?
I think the first game was. At the very least, I think there was a branching path that would have created a new timeline, and maybe we'd win in that timeline. I think it was turn three, maybe turn four. I lined up a pretty good set of removal to kill everything on his board. It involved like Bellows Breath. He disciplined on like the Scuttle Crab and Yi. He disciplined the Scuttle Crab. I listed to kill the Scuttle Crab and then flourished the Yi. Um, and from that scenario, things looked pretty good. But I made a mistake in that moment because my hand was awkward. I wanted to draw off of his Seat of Power, so I did a double conquer. But that meant first off that I was recycling a rune to the sigil, and
Mhm.
secondly, I was giving an avenue for Rengar. I should have known that his hand was probably full of like Rengars and Ruin Runners because he didn't have a way of saving the Yi from the flourish, which meant he didn't have a Defy or an On Guard, which surprised me. But there had to be something in there. By giving the avenue for the Rengar, I significantly sped up his point ability. I needed to waste a gust to keep Ezreal alive. It was something that when I was like looking back at the matchup and talking to another very good Ezreal player, Soraya, he pointed it out, and he was absolutely correct. That was not the correct play in that moment. If I had not done that, I don't know what would have happened for the rest of the game, but the rest of the game could have played out pretty differently. In game two, there probably was not much that could have been done. Maybe there was some different positioning on the final turn involving the Kazakhs and maybe trying to make him put some resources on both battlefields instead of just one. But I
Right.
think he would have found his way to lethal regardless on that turn.
That game to me from the Ezreal noob looked completely unwinnable. I shared
Yeah,
similar sentiments on game one, like, okay, I wonder what would happen if we take in this line, but game two just looked like, you got it, buddy. I'm sorry for playing your game.
yeah, it was unfortunate when I mind splitter him and I saw double defy Zonia's and punch first. I knew there was a danger, and then I did a play that I think was correct, which was take the punch first and then play into a line that works around him not having buffs. Because I was going for in that moment was I essentially can't play spells for the rest of the game, but I have a mind splitter, I have double Kazakhs, and he has no buffs in hand. And I was
Mhm.
trying to lean into a scenario where the rest of his hand was useless essentially because of what I presented to him. The problem was he top decked the punch first, um, and the plan kind of fell apart.
Classic
Yeah, I
Yi
think it was
moment.
yeah, it was the right choice in my mind in that moment, even though it didn't pan out. You can sometimes overcorrect when a play didn't work because like you can't make the choice based on information you didn't have.
Very
But
sure.
the fact that he top decked the punch first there certainly sealed the door on a game I was already behind on.
Right. Okay. So now I get to ask you the question that everyone loves commenting. If there was anything in your list you would change, what is it?
For the meta that I expected to see, and I think my expectations were mostly correct, I'm pretty happy with my list. Now, the meta that exists in a week from now might be a different meta, and that might
Right.
justify a different list. But for what we were facing in Hartford, nothing comes to mind for a change for me. Like one change that I did very late in the game was I cut the singularity. I had a one of
Mhm.
singularity in the deck instead of the third Bellows Breath, and I switched it. And my reasoning essentially was that Bellows is a lot better into the yellow aggro decks, and you can use Bellows accompanied with the list to set up removal on larger units. Coupled with the fact the decks that like present the best singularity targets tend to be like Draven, Diana, Annie. Draven's already a great matchup. You don't need the singularity to fight it. And
Sure.
Diana and Annie hold up counter spells for it. And one of the ways you can lose the Diana matchup is if your singularity gets counterspelled. That puts you really far behind. And against the Annie matchup, that's true, but you aren't necessarily ahead of the Annie matchup. It's already dangerous. So what that leads to is in these scenarios, especially versus Annie, which you can never get to tap out, you will not play the singularity unless you absolutely have to, which means it is a dead card in your hand a lot of the times, even though these are the matchups it's nominally supposed to be good at.
Right.
So I think I had to stand by that. Singularity is a good card, but the fact that the decks that it's good against right now run counter spells is very not ideal.
Very,
Um,
very spooky.
yeah. And beyond that, I was really happy with the sprite fountains. I stand by the double angler beast, even though it didn't happen to pay off in this event. Maybe I would have switched the acceptable losses to something else because there wasn't as much Aurelia, but that's still a dangerous thing to switch on. I think I feel pretty happy with the list overall.
Very good. Okay, now next thing I want to get into here is give me a generalized Mulligan game plan. Obviously, this being a control deck, every single legend you sit across is going to modify this in some way, shape, or form. But give me a nice broad overview that people who want to try this out can use as a base level approach when they start playing it.
Sure. So you really want a pack. Against most matchups, you do want to have a pack of wonders. You don't necessarily want two in all of them, especially not in your opening hand. So you really want that. Stack decks and stupefies are good. They're really good for unbricking your hand. A stupefy can be a really easy way to trigger your Ez Legend or to combo with another card. So you really want those. If you have a pack, you really want a trove, especially if you're going first. Like against almost every deck, if you begin the game with turn one Trove, turn two pack the Trove, replay the Trove, like you're going to have accelerated two runes. You're going to be really set up. Even if they get a conquer for it, it's fine. And against a lot of decks, you really want a Deadly Flourish, so you can just like spawn camp their first unit.
Right.
Because just killing their first unit, getting a gold, the next turn you could do something like an Ezreal using the gold or a Fizz using the gold without deramping. It's just a really efficient way to start the game. The things you don't want so much in most matchups, you don't want a Starcross in your opening hand, and you don't need a Fizz in your opening hand. You can keep it if the rest of your hand is good, but you feel very fine mulling a Fizz. Fizz is a great card, but you need to have set up the game a little bit before it can do anything. Um, so you don't want to end up with a starting hand of like double Fizzes and no good Fizz spells.
Right.
You're usually fine mauling a Thousand Tail Watcher, especially since we run two. It's not like if you maul a Thousand Tail Watcher, then you'll never see it again this matchup. Sometimes you do want to keep it if it's a matchup where it's particularly important and if you have other tools, but you're pretty happy to maul it. You don't generally want Bewitching Spirits in your opening hand. In most matchups, they're not a particularly good early game play because your opponent will just discard whatever is not important right now,
Right.
especially in game one when there's going to be a subset of their deck that isn't important. It's something that you more want to use later on. When you play a Bewitching Spirit early game, it's usually because you had nothing better to do. And I would say that's essentially it. If it's a matchup where Bellows is good, you really want a Bellows in your opening hand. Because in matchups where Bellows is good, two Bellows is usually better. So you really want to like aggressively mull for them. And yeah, I would say that's the basics of it.
And if you have questions that you want to ask Brady, Mulligan matchup expectations, what to do, this, that, and the other, I will have his socials in the description below. And he is very active in the community Discord in the Ezreal channel. So if you have a question, pop it in there, and he will get back to you one way or another. So as we kind of start to segue out here, do you have any shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, so I have a few. So first, I just want to shout out the entire Montreal community. It wasn't on screen, but you could hear a bit of the singing. After the end of the top rate round, learned that most of the players from Montreal, everyone who could, had stayed late. Because I had been like kept away from production, so I couldn't be there to do a group photo. So instead
Mhm.
of doing the rational thing and doing the group photo without me, they waited and then argued with production to pull me away after the match before they like bring you over to do the interview and stuff. Production was saying no, and they put their foot down, and it was an extremely gratifying thing. It
It's
was
awesome.
very. There was a lot of good feels around that. I don't have the best words to describe it, but it meant a lot to me.
That's good. Montreal people
Yeah.
are good people. One of my best friends is Montrealer. I'm sure you know him. Old Grenton, my bald goat.
Oh yeah, Grenton is a great guy.
Love that guy. Big fan.
Yeah. So I wanted to shout out, continuing on the Montrealers trend a little bit, the second best of Vexer. He did extremely well. He's another Montreal player. He was the other 8-0 Ez at the end of day one. So I just wanted to give a shout out to him.
Wow,
He's playing a
two
little bit of
8-0
a different
Ezreals.
version. Yep. Of the 9 8-0s, two of them were Ezreals. It was a very surprising stat. But yeah, he did great. He got his top 64, so he got his regional invite, and I am very proud of his performance. Um, I wanted to shout out another Ezreal player, not a Montrealer this time. Their name is Storm. So I did not build this deck from scratch. When I was in Vancouver, I was on like a Rasa Gila style deck.
Mhm.
And then I became convinced by my Vancouver experience that was not the place to be. And I'm very glad he did this. He successfully bothered me into giving Pack another try because the first time I tried Pack versions, I had bounced off them pretty hard, and I
Sure.
did so again this time. But he pushed me to keep at it. Like my original set of testing, I went 2-10. That was not a very good set of
Ooh.
testing. It took a while to adapt to this deck. Um, and to adapt to its play lines and its resource management and all that. But yeah, the base of the deck that I iterated from was his. And while I certainly made changes, I think I made some improvements. Most of the work was from his initial list, so I wanted to give him a shout out there. Um, and I guess the last thing I want to say is in the process of this has been a first for me getting this kind of accomplishment in a card game or really in any competitive event.
Well
The
deserved.
outpouring of support from the community has been tremendous. People have been very nice, even on Twitter, which is not where you expect people to be nice. People have been extremely nice. I've spoken to a lot of my opponents that I faced throughout the day, and I had great interactions with them. So just shout out to the community as a whole, to the people I faced throughout the 2 days at Hartford. I think we've started to form a very positive community, and I hope we
Absolutely.
maintain it.
Absolutely. Riftbound is full of good people, better players, and just awesome people to support each other. So,
Mhm.
yeah, if you have any questions for Brady, put them in the comments below. He'll see them. I'll forward them to him. Any last words, Brady, before we check out of here?
I don't think so. I think I said everything I could think of.
All right, everybody. I will see you in the next one. And once again, Brady, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you.